I want to talk, as we move into chapter 17, about the va consecutive. It's not only complex, but it has a lot of significance in our understanding of the Hebrew. If we were to look in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 1, we find the scripture has this narrative turn. You know, what happened before then was the worldwide flood, the deluge. And ultimately, all of humanity was destroyed, save 8 in the ark. And so we encounter this beautiful narrative change, this turn, that after the chaos of the flood, after judgment, after this silence period for a while, suddenly the Hebrew text pivots, and it reads, if I can pronounce it right, wayyiqtol, and Elohim. And it simply means, and then God remembered. The opening here, the very first verb with zakor is a perfect form, meaning to remember. So in the perfect, it would be he remembered. It's for 3ms. And then if we put it in the imperfect, it would be then God, or would be will remember, or does remember in the present or the future, right? But then we add this little vav consecutive. And it's similar, looks like a vav conjunction where we would say and, but it's a little different. And the meaning has significant impact to it. And then God remembered is the translation for wayyiqtol, Elohim. That opening vav consecutive imperfect is not accidental. It's a Hebrew narrative form that moves the story forward from the form that marks the very next decisive move, decisive act that God is going to make. In other words, the grammar itself signals something very theologically profound. God is not finished. He didn't just bring judgment on humanity and bring destruction and then silence for so much period of time on the ark. But he's about to act, and he's on the move. And so this vav consecutive signals something's going to happen. Something has changed. Something different is going on. So up to this point, the flood the narrative had been dominated by human corruption and divine judgment over and over again. Not judgment over and over again, but the corruption over and over again, and God's judgment coming up on humanity. But with the single vav consecutive verb from zakor, meaning, or in the imperfect form would be yiqtol, and then when we put the vav consecutive to it, it becomes wayyiqtol, and the entire direction of the story shifts. The story now moves from judgment to mercy. The Hebrew vav consecutive here is a sequential marker, and it points out that this is the very next event. This is the turning point. This is where God is stepping back into the picture. Theologically, it highlights a truth that's woven throughout Scripture. This is used over and over. I think, if I remember right, the perfect verb is used about 6,500 times. The imperfect verb is used about 15, with the vav consecutive, about 6,500 times, and about, with the imperfect, the vav consecutive, about 1,500 times. So 6,500 vav consecutive with the perfect form, and about 15,000 times with the imperfect vav consecutive form. So you find it over and over, is my point. So God initiates here the restoration. So, Noah and his family didn't climb out of the ark independently on their own, decide, okay, it looks good enough, let's get out. But no, he initiates the restoration. And so we don't climb out of the waters ourselves. He brings us out. And when the text says God remembered, it does not imply that he'd forgotten. In biblical language, remembering refers often to act on behalf of, or to fulfill a promise, or to move toward his people with mercy. And so in this way, the vav consecutive marks not just some kind of sequence of events, but really marks salvation now entering into the storyline. So the grammar becomes the vehicle of God's mercy and God's grace being applied. And so when we're in periods of our own flood, we're stuck in the flood chapters of our own life. Our own life, the water's rising. We feel like we might drown. prayers don't always feel like they're answered. You're kind of wanting what's going on, and your story sort of feels frozen, stuck. But the God who wrote Genesis 8:1 is the same God today. At the right time, God writes a new storyline for us. And he says, and then God remembered. Wayyiqtol, Elohim. He steps in, he moves, he acts, he brings deliverance. And so this Vav consecutive reminds us that God is the God in control. God is the God of movement. His movement is towards mercy, towards restoration, and towards covenant faithfulness. And so as we think about chapter 17, and we look at this Vav consecutive, there are some theological significance in its application. And that's kind of what we want to look at today. I don't think you'll find the Vav consecutive really overly complex, but understanding when it's applied, or recognizing and understanding when it's applied, is going to take a little effort.